talking about Descartes on the soul in Meditations 2 and 6, some objections to Descartes by contemporary thinkers, and also the modern neuroscience view. So Descartes in his letter, he attempts to demonstrably prove that God and the soul exist to non-believers without any religious presumptions. What demonstrably proved means is that it's a deductively valid argument, namely that it's impossible for the premises to be true and the conclusion to be false. Descartes embarks on a joint metaphysical and epistemological activity to show that reality is not just physical. Descartes' position is that of dualism. Dualism, the view, namely, notes that a person consists of distinct mental and bodily substances united together. So in Meditations 2, Descartes holds that in order to know X, one must be certain of X. If something can be doubted, it must be treated as wholly false. So what a person experiences with the senses, namely that I have a body, I can see my hands, there are objects in front of me, can be doubted. This is the case because we could conceive of an evil demon or evil god deceiving our senses. That what we experience, namely touch, taste, and sight and hear, can be manipulated by this evil god or evil demon that's deceiving the person. Thus, Descartes concludes that we can't be certain on what we experience through our senses. However, Descartes notes that there's one thing that he can be certain of, namely that he exists. Because even though the evil demon or evil god is deceiving all his physical, all the things that he sees physically and that his senses, the very nature of him doubting implies that he exists. There's one thing that he could be certain, and that he exists. Because even though all this is going on, the fact that he doubts, it logically implies that he exists. In Meditations 2, I would like to develop this view further, what we just noted. This is like the argument, and this is known as the cogito. In order to know X, one must be certain of X. I could doubt all sorts of beliefs, but I cannot doubt that I exist. Therefore, I am thinking, I exist, this is certain. The support of premise 3 is that the very nature of doubting affirms that I exist. You cannot doubt if you don't exist. It presupposes existence. Doubt presupposes existence, that's really saying. So then we get the proposition, I am thinking, I exist, this is certain. Now Descartes believes that this proposition is true. It's necessarily true whenever conceived by him, and that Descartes' conception of himself is a thinking thing without a body. This is known as the cogito. And what Descartes means is what he means by conception of himself is that his essence. So Aristotle, he made a difference between non-essential properties and what properties are essential. So for example, a human being, we could still conceive a human being being a human even though he loses his limbs. So the limbs are something which Aristotle noted as a non-essential property, that even one loses that property, he doesn't fail to be a human being. Or a tomato, for example, the color red is a non-essential property to being a tomato, because the tomato can lose its color, but we can still say that it's still a tomato. So in Meditation 6, this is a defense of the cogito. So it's a defense of 1, 2, and 3, namely that I think I exist, namely that I am thinking I exist as a certain, and that it's true, it's necessarily true whenever conceived by him, and that his conception of himself is a thinking thing without a body. So Meditation 6 is the defense of this. So Descartes talks about his conceivability argument. He develops a conceivability argument. So a property is essential to X if it cannot be doubted that X exists without it. Now there's a criticism, namely by Priest, who wrote that just because you could conceive that a property is not essential to X, that doesn't mean that's really metaphysically distinct. However, what Descartes means by conceivability is clear and distinct ideas. So for example, think about a triangle. So we think about, you see a yellow triangle on the screen. Now, someone asks, what is the essential property of the triangle? We could clearly and distinctly in our minds figure out, without referring to a triangle, that yellow is not an essential property of that triangle, because we could conceive of triangles existing without the property of it being yellow. But we cannot conceive of a triangle existing without it being 180 degrees. So the essence of the triangle, one of the essential properties of a triangle, is it being 180 degrees. But an inessential property of a triangle is it being yellow. So that was just a little clarification of premise 1, that a property is essential to X if it cannot be doubted that X exists without it. So with the triangle example, 180 degrees, the property of a triangle being 180 degrees is essential to it being a triangle, because it cannot be doubted that a triangle exists without it being 180 degrees. Now premise 2 notes that I could conceive of myself existing without the body, because as we argued in the earlier slides, that Descartes can doubt that he has a physical body because a evil demon could be deceiving him. Thus Descartes concludes that my body is not essential to me. However, Descartes knows that I cannot conceive of myself existing without my mind, because the very nature of doubt implies existence. Thus, my mind is essential to me. Therefore, Descartes concludes that the mind and body are really distinct, arriving to dualism, that a person consists of both bodily and mental substances united together. Now, there's criticism of Descartes by his contemporary thinkers, namely Hume and Lidenberg. Lidenberg's challenge is targeting the logic in Descartes' argument. Descartes' conclusion cannot be found through his stated premises. So he's saying that Descartes' argument is invalid, that the premises do not guarantee the conclusion. It is possible that there are thoughts, but no thinker, Lidenberg notes. There can be experiences of thoughts. It does not follow that there's a thinking thing. So Descartes is challenging the logic. Lidenberg is challenging the logic in Descartes' argument. And now we have Hume's challenge to Descartes. So Hume is an empiricist. So Hume believes that we gain knowledge through our experiences. So he sets out to meditate, because Descartes claims that he found the self through meditation, namely that through his meditation he found that his conception of his essence is that of a thinking thing. So the self is the thinking thing. So Hume attempts to do the same thing. But when Hume goes to meditate, he says that all we find are a collection of experiences. He does not find the self, that there's actually a thinking thing. Hume's second challenge is that Hume's second challenge is that Hume claims that Descartes presupposes that his mind is working properly. He questions, how does Descartes know that his thinking processes are reliable? So Descartes believes that the evil demon or evil god can be deceiving his senses. But why can the evil god not deceive his thinking processes? So Hume challenges that Descartes is presupposing that his thinking processes are reliable. Descartes versus the modern neuroscience view of the mind. So in the modern neuroscience view, they explain physical and mental phenomenon in terms of the physical mechanism which underlies it. So a mechanism is a structure performing a function in virtue of its component parts, operations, and organizations. Descartes believes that physical phenomena can be explained in terms of physical mechanisms, but not mental phenomena. This is because Descartes applies Leibniz's law, which means that something is distinct if they have different properties. So when we go and see physical things, namely my body, like this hand right here, right? The hand is spatial, it takes up space. It could be measured, it could be seen, it could be weighted, and it's public. Everyone can see this. But my thoughts, what I'm thinking right now and what you're thinking, is something which is non-spatial, non-weighed, and private. So physical things and mental things share different properties. So Descartes believes that physical mechanisms cannot explain mental phenomena, since they are two different things. But modern neuroscience holds that both mental and physical phenomena can be explained in terms of the physical mechanism which underlies it. Modern neuroscience views that the mind contains information processing, which is a function, and the mechanism is a structure performing the function. So it's explaining the function. So the mind is reduced, or the mind is essentially the brain, what they would say. The mind is a property of something in the brain. But Descartes holds that the mind is a substance in itself. Also, Descartes believes that the mind and body interact causally, namely that the mind can cause effects in the body and the body can cause effects in the mind. So causal relationships are two-way. So for causal relations, namely an example of that is me flipping the light switch on causes the lights to turn on. So we have event 1 and event 2. They're logically distinct. Event 1, me flipping the light switch on, is X, and the light turning on event 2 is Y. They're also temporally distinct. They occur at different times. The light switch flipping on and the lights turning on don't occur at the same time. They occur at different times. So we have temporally distinct, logically distinct, and the relation is two-way. So the relation between mind and body, according to Descartes, is causal. But modern neuroscience holds that the mind and body interact through a constitutional relation. Constitutional relations are one way, and they're logically distinct but not temporally distinct, namely that X is sufficient for Y. What that means is whenever X is present, Y is present as well. So we could see like a glass bottle, for example. There's the particles that are there, the atoms that are interacting, but also the shape of the object, or the structure of the object. They occur at the same time, and they're not temporally distinct, however they're logically distinct. So modern neuroscience holds that the body has a one-way relation to the mind, and it's not a two-way relation, because ultimately they hold that the mind is a property of his substance, not the mind being a substance itself. So this is Descartes' comparison with the modern neuroscience view, namely Descartes views that physical mechanisms cannot explain mental phenomenon, the mind and body interact causally, and the mind is a substance, while modern neuroscience holds that physical mechanisms can explain both mental and physical phenomenon, that the mind and body interact through a constitutional relation, and that the mind is a property of a substance, not a substance itself. So this is my little presentation on Descartes. This is of course like intro level from what I learned in class and from my readings. So I hope you enjoyed this presentation, and thank you.